Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Dennis Stegwall. I'm the president of the Housing Innovation Alliance, and you're joining our Coffee Talk series. Today, we're going to take a look at the future of our industry, rebooted. But before we get into the main event, I want to share a little bit about our organization. So we're a nationwide community of game changers powering the future of home delivery. We're committed to helping production builders build better by identifying, prioritizing, and shining a light on innovation in the marketplace. And we hold up these ideas and then challenge our community to improve on them in an effort to continuously raise the tide for all of us. And it's more about sharing snapshots of ideas at a specific moment in time. We thread them together for your business benefit. To achieve this, we curate conversations, serving as your platform to have a voice and be heard across our industry. We are a business concierge to facilitate high value, high impact connections, and we deliver tools and resources for better decision-making and strategic capital allocations. All right, maybe we can get fast forward a couple slides here. Yeah. All right, we'll jump to the next one, Betsy, on the partners. So now more than ever, it's important we band together to drive change and become better businesses. I want to say thank you to our partners for making all of our programming possible, including this conversation today. Their leadership goes a long way towards moving the industry forward. So with that, I just want to give you some quick background on what the format for today's discussion will be. This will be an expert Q&A led by our chairman, George Casey. You have the ability to input questions as we go through the conversation into the chat box below. Into the Q&A box below, and then we will get to those throughout the dialogue as time allows. Anything we miss, we will be sure to circle back to after the call with each of our expert panelists and then follow up either via our website or email. So I just want to also talk a little bit about the genesis of this conversation. So we've gone through what many would call a hard reset, both in society and our economy. And what we want to do is create some inspiration on where do we want to go as an industry? Where are we starting from? And then ultimately, how do we get there? And we couldn't think of anyone better than our very own George Casey to help lead us through that dialogue and the team of experts from within our community to share insights from across the construction ecosystem. So George is a seasoned industry exec, a C-suite advisor, a full ULI member, and an active council leader. He's also a mentor and our very own Yoda for the industry. The force is strong with this one. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, George, and take it away.
Proud I am, forward will I go. Isn't the way Yoda probably would have said it?
Yeah, you got it.
So, it's wonderful. So the panel I would like to introduce this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I'll go start with Rich Rodriguez wearing the headset here, coming to us from Austin, Texas. I've known Rich for more than 20 years. And he currently is the EVP for operations for Amherst Residential and Amherst Holdings, very much involved in the single family for rent space with new homes in communities. So, and using modular at times to do it. So it covers a couple of areas we're going to be talking about. Margaret Whelan is coming us from the Hamptons in Long Island. That's the beach in the background, believe it or not. So, by the way, if you notice in Rich's background, he's got a knight's suit of armor. So know us by what is in our backgrounds. So Margaret has been a long time industry sage, advisor. I first got to know her probably 15, 20 years ago when she was head of investment banking for the housing industry for JP Morgan. She's been one of the top rated analysts on Wall Street, and with her own boutique investment advisory firm right now, she has facilitated many of the new transactions that define the new industry right now, both from the building product side and on the home builder side. So welcome, Margaret. Her pair in this in some ways is Steve Kim, who's the senior managing director at Evercore ISI. He right now is, in my mind, the top analyst in Wall Street for housing. He understands it. He's been in this business a long time, and his overview is just fabulous. He sits in the perch watching what goes on in the industry. John Osborne is the VP of National Builders and Ready Frame for BMC. He's coming to us from out in the Salt Lake, Utah area. And I've known John now for a while. He's been very involved in our Housing Innovation Alliance, and his thinking about where the industry goes at this intersection of building material suppliers and builders and distribution. He's sitting on the leading edge of some of the major changes going there. And finally, we have Chuck Chippero. Raise your hand there, Chuck, coming to us from Atlanta, Georgia. Chuck is a VP of Strategic Sourcing and Innovation at Pulte. He's been at Pulte for north of 20 years right now and has been very involved in Pulte's thinking about how you do housing differently. And so he comes at it from the operator, big builder for sales side of the industry. So to start off, I'm going to go to you, Margaret, first, just for a simple question. Has this really been a hard reset, or was this just a blip that we've gone through?
Has it been a reset? I believe so. I believe that we have seen adoption and adaptation of the use of technology in our industry in the last 12 weeks. That's been more accelerated potentially than in the last 12 years in some of the business, right? In terms of the use of Matterport and some of the software that's available on the sales side, remote closings, drive-through title and insurance documents being signed. So yes, I absolutely believe that it's a reset. I do think it's permanent. For the last couple of years, every spring we would say, okay, where are we in the cycle? Are we going to see a correction? Are we going to slow down? And then all of a sudden it came upon us. It was a very shift and sharp correction. We know that it has started to recover more quickly, I think, than most people anticipated. And the question is just, what's the growth trajectory going to look like from here?
Stephen, any comments on top of that?
Yeah, I definitely think that we've hit a turning point. I think that all the high frequency data, I guess, for lack of a better expression, has continued to come in extremely strong, but after a massive pullback. Housing transactions likely pulled back 60, 70%. So clearly somebody pulled the plug out of the wall, and thank God they pushed it back in real fast. But I think that shock to the system, much like we do that when our electronics aren't working in all the ways that we would like, that action has, I think, set some changes in motion, and hopefully the industry will be better off for it on the other side. I certainly think that on the part of consumers, there's been a revised appreciation, a renewed appreciation for all the things that the delivers. Maybe they took for granted, weren't there as much as they are now. So that's something I'm sure that we'll discuss as we get on with the program later.
So Chuck, you see this from the vantage point of one of the largest builders in the United States. So hard reset or just a blip?
Well, I concur that it is somewhat of a reset. Although I am pleased to report what we just talked about is the fact that we are starting to see, evidence of a quicker recovery than what we all anticipated just a few weeks back. But I do feel that there has been some changes, especially on the technology side that, fast forward, we really need to continue to leverage going forward.
So we're going to come back to that. John, you look at this from the building supply side of the equation. Your thoughts?
I personally wouldn't say it feels like a hard reset to me. We didn't really stop. We just had to make decisions as a company to predict what we would need in short-term periods. So we're having to do more with less as a company, and we're trying to accelerate the change ourselves, in our customers' behavior as far as, how they do business with us and how we can impact affordability as a company.
So Rich, you get this from a little different angle because in your world, you're doing single family for rent primarily. From the words that we've heard around the country, that part of the business has done pretty well through this period. True, not true?
Can't speak for all of them, George, but certainly from our standpoint, we've been pleasantly surprised at how resilient the SFR market is, and not just from the resident customer standpoint, but from the entire supply chain. I think your first question, was it a blip or was it a reset? I think it's a little bit of both. It's a blip in terms of the time, relatively short, 3 months, but the overall impact of that reset, if you think about back in late March where we were, it's the ultimate fire drill. It's not just ring the bell. It's no, you're going to get your stuff. You're going to get out of the building. Do you know where to go? We were tested on all fronts: supply chain, transactional, labor, our own employees. And in terms of that, I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the theories that we had a decade ago is that as if single family for rent built for new came into the system, it could act as a buffer or a shock absorber, where the single family for sale market tended to be cyclical, tied to mortgage rates and a variety of other things. The for rent market seemed to be stable and would operate itself through it, and probably could provide stability into the supply chain. So John, you have a thought on that?
I'm meeting with America Homes for Rent tomorrow morning in Las Vegas.
Oh, come on, John, come on.
That's a ding.
No.
We think it's a big opportunity, especially because of the consistency that it brings, the lack of variation in plans, and all the people to manage the information that's needed to deliver products to the job. I think that's one of our biggest challenges as an industry, is that there's so much SG&A spent on information management, and the lack of collaboration that it causes, and the self-interest across every single trade contractor and their distribution partners, the manufacturers, the labor, the whole chain, so that homes for rent category is simplified, and it's much needed. There's a huge amount of people that need that to be there for them. So we're excited about it.
So I'm going to pick up on the thing of the information sharing. I know, Chuck, you've been deep into the stuff of upfront interactive planning using BIM around subcontractors, architects, engineers. So as they say in Top Gun, talk to me, Goose.
Yeah. For us, that's one thing we've been able to continue to develop and maintain, and that is, what we call the integrated design process, with really all of our key partners. So we've worked, openly with BMC, for example, John and his team, on designing product up front, before we put the first stick on the ground. We also are doing that internally with our ICG acquisition, where we are able to control the whole end-to-end process. And we do see great efficiency by doing that. We think that's one of the keys to providing attainability or affordability, and that is designing the product efficiently upfront, right?
So it seems like this idea that there is a space for simplicity and easy replication, that the cost benefits for that, irrespective of price point, it can be at the lowest end, it can be at the middle end, it can be the high end, is one way that you can kind of alter or bend the cost curve, I guess is the buzzword. Margaret, you've been thinking about this, I know, in the work that initially you did looking around in Tekra, some of the work you did with Buddy Rainey down in Florida. Is this simplicity a key thing that we look as at least a piece of the future that allows the industry to get more productive?
I think so. And, American Homes for Rent and their peers who are raising a lot of capital for these rental communities are providing a very good opportunity for folks like BMC, because they are simplifying the plans. There's no options, no upgrades, no elevations, as John said. And so you can reverse engineer the plans, rationalize, take out the waste, and build very quickly. And as they do that, they're often operating in a community within a master plan where you have a lot of stick builders looking around saying, wait a second, we're selling one house or closing one house per week, and those guys just did 2 or 3. What's the difference? Where's the efficiency? So I think that that's the big opportunity, and it simplifies the product.
Yeah. So Rich, you're kind of taking this idea and putting it on steroids by looking at using modular solutions. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Even before the COVID piece hit, we were always looking at how do we scale, and how do you scale quickly? And to Margaret's point a second ago, it's very difficult to scale uniqueness. You can scale normal or within a range of operations. So we're trying to partner with some modular manufacturers to see if we could at least take 60% of that construction process and have it done off-site in parallel to what's going on in the field. And what we found, George, is as we start to put these homes on the ground, and they are homes, they're not modular units, they're full-on homes. It's the ancillary services around the structure that still need to optimize, get today's technology, and to really become in today's modern building world. And I mean from the foundation piece and even the transportation of the units themselves. And then you get into the municipalities, which are still operating in a lot of ways like they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it's a sort of if you think of a histogram, there's different parts of the process that are moving faster than the other, but the modular piece is absolutely at the cutting edge.
I mean, Chuck, in your world, of you thinking about this, I know Pulte is always, even 20, 30 years ago, was looking at, prefab foundations put in place. They're building houses, testing them in factories, all that kind of stuff. Is this a road, this bigger and bigger componentization, which ultimately is probably modular, but is that something you're looking at seriously?
Yeah, well, I think our focus is still a little bit more on what I would call conventional, frame shell construction. So down with our ICG acquisition, we're building a typical house, maybe 4,000 square feet under roof in 3 days, including punch out. But that's swinging floor decks, that's making the porch system modular, that's doing some sub-assemblies in the roof. And we're able to do that with a very small amount of field labor. So it's still one step short of a fully integrated module, but it's it's moving in that direction. And we're able to do that. It does allow us to keep our logistics costs down, but it also is a ballet. It's important that those products are delivered, on time at the right place, so that all of that vertical construction can be done in 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, it is choreography. It's more closer to the Bolshoi ballet than you'd like to think.
Yes, it is.
So
it's like synchronized swimming.
So what was that, Margaret?
I said, when you're out of the job site and you see the cranes swinging in, flying in the trusses, it almost feels like synchronized swimming, because all of the framers who are in the house as those pieces are coming in, they're all communicating non-verbally. They're so used to working with each other, and they have to stay safe. You have these big pieces coming in, so it's fascinating to watch it.
Yeah, so it's Stephen, this the idea that we might have two parallel tracks going on. One is that you're going down this kind of componentization, modularization kind of road, where kind of Rich is playing on one side and Chuck a little bit. The other one is that you're taking the existing stick building process and maybe trying to apply industrial engineering to that process. How do you better scheduling, take cycle time out, better coordination, but staying with what I'll call the classic build it in the field, piece by piece thing. Do you see this industrial engineering side on the stick built side showing up at all in any of your travels?
Well, sure. I think, John, certainly with the Ready Frame product, I mean, that's very much playing to that kind of that side of the builder audience, and I think they do it very well. I think there's going to be certain areas where because the availability of labor is superior than in other areas, you'll have companies like D.R. Horton that'll tell you flat out that it doesn't make sense for them to try to pursue a heavily industrialized kind of a process in indoors and factories, because they can find the labor they need on the ground, outdoors, and it works just fine. And so I think that what I'm hearing is that some of the more advanced componentry that are assembled into floor cassettes, panels, and even almost stopping short of modular. But if you could probably include modular, that's going to be for certain projects. It's going to be project oriented at first. It's not going to be run wholesale everywhere. So I think you'll have, like you said, parallel paths, competing paths, but there's going to be certain areas where it just makes sense to stay with the traditional stick framing for a while. And there'll be areas where it'll make a lot of sense to sort of innovate and maybe move to something that's a little bit more manufactured indoors. And I think it'll probably be like that for a period of time. And I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, so, I mean, this has not been known as an industry that changes very quickly. Mm-hmm. But you can see these kind of beginnings of glacial changes in their own lanes. Let me shift topics just a hair here, a little bit. That we've talked about labor. Labor, without a doubt, was tight until all of a sudden COVID hit, and then with massive, layoffs, unemployment, so on and so forth. Not necessarily in the construction trades, but across the really the labor spectrum. Is there an opportunity that builders will be able to figure out how to bring those people who used to be cooks or dishwashers or waiters or retail clerks into the industry, or not? Is that just a false hope? Margaret, I'll start with you.
It's an interesting question. Everyone's been talking about it. The reality is that as an industry, we have our most skilled framers aging out, graying out, retiring. We haven't done a good job of bringing in the next generation so that there's an overlap period where we can train them. And so that generation that's graying is also most vulnerable to COVID. And so that has been a gap that I think is going to be bigger. It's encouraging to hear John say from the BMC side that they didn't really miss a beat because the industry was deemed essential, yet Stephen's saying we're up as much as 80% off the bottom in some markets. So there's been a lag there, and the availability of the jobs are there. We have clients that are turnkey framers who have factories that are unionized in some cases, and the employees get more money right now to stay home than to come in. And so I think the unemployment numbers are hard to track. Then you also have a fact that a lot of the very skilled framers are from south of the border, and I have a couple of clients who told me that their best framers jumped in a truck and drove south a couple of months ago and have yet to reappear. So I think I'm not a big believer that we're going to find all this new labor come into our industry. There's a difference between labor and skilled labor, and staying a long time and being committed. And as an industry, we need to create opportunities that are attractive for these young people, but I'm not sure that we're there yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I remember visiting Blueprint Robotics up in Baltimore a couple of years ago. And what amazed me is I think there were like 300 people on the shift, and asking the CEO how many of them have come out of the industry, and the answer was 0. That they had all come from someplace else, that they had been trained to be on the line. And, so I go to you, John. It seems to me that if you're running a componentized factory or modular factory or whatever, the ability to bring unskilled into a line position in a factory might be an easier transition than trying to bring them out on a job site and have them know how to use a framing square.
For sure, it's easier to bring people into a factory setting. We've actually had some good luck in diversity with women in particular working in our ready frame systems in our distribution facilities. I would say that there could be an opportunity for the unemployed, to come into it, but they have to have a reason, and the traditional old ways of building might not be their reason. If there's a designer position or a software type information management position, or something like that, I could see an influx.
Chuck, I saw you nodding a little bit here, so which means there's something behind in your head that's wanting to come out.
Well, what we're seeing is, the supply chain definitely has been stressed over the past number of weeks. as we continue to build houses all through this pandemic, some of our suppliers weren't so successful. They had manufacturing plants that were in states that were shuttered. And bringing those folks back, their absentee levels, their productivity is down. However, what has happened over the past few weeks is many of them have had great success hiring people that were baristas and working in the service industry, and they're having success having them work on the line. These are cabinet manufacturers, manufacturers of electrical components. So they're at least being able to recover faster, by the fact that there is some labor out there willing to come back to work as opposed to collecting the unemployment check.
So yeah, I'm going to insert a comment here from our friend Rodney Hall that says Blueprint's MVP last year was their shipping coordinator, who was a hostess at Red Lobster prior. Their field manager, who supervised component installs, had zero experiences too. He was an artist / sculptor prior. So that was it. Rich, go ahead.
And George, just on this topic of capacity and keeping the flow going, I think we learned a long time ago, pre-COVID, back even to the Zarian days, that capacity is not what a particular manufacturer or labor team can produce. It's what they can produce combined with what they're willing to dedicate to you and your operation. And in that way, capacity is very relative. So I think out of the COVID piece specifically, we might see some expediting of internalization of certain labor trades and certain tasks. I know we've taken the piece of our business in our larger cities where we know we have the scale and volume. We've internalized that labor force as a hedge against something that the COVID or who knows what.
So for Chuck Chippero, does the word Devasta come to mind here?
Yes. Yeah, certainly. Devasta was a fully integrated operation. A vast majority of everybody working on the job site were Pulte employees or Devasta employees. Yeah.
So it's so there are times when this come back, but this goes back to Rich will remember reading the book The Goal by Elihu Goldratt. That if Herbie is there and you either subordinate to the constraint or you try to overcome the constraint by creativity, doing something. And one of them is to take the constraint, bring it in-house, and then manage it from there. So there are ways to do this. I want to take a little bit of a shift here and think about, we've seen some degree of digitization coming in we talked about on the upfront design side using BIM. One of the things that kind of has amazed me over the past 3 months is how quickly the customer acquisition side of things, sales, so on and so forth, has basically gone virtual, digital, all of those things together to the point that literally people are buying houses without ever physically being in a model home or physically being in front of a sales person. I'm going to start with Steve Kim. You're looking at this do you see this accelerating?
Well, it's super interesting because that was one of the things that I think enabled the builders to see such a rapid recovery in their sales. We don't have all the numbers yet to know whether or not that's something that the larger builders have used as an opportunity to gain market share at the expense of the smaller builders. It wouldn't surprise me if that was part of the answer, because they've got the capital to be able to invest into systems that would enable them to capture the customer through the virtual realm, perhaps more easily than a small builder who's 5 or 6 homes a year. I also think that we haven't seen fully enough to know whether we are seeing maybe the edge of the customers who are most desperate, if you will, or most extremely motivated to move into their home and who are willing to do what many of us have historically thought would not be done, which is buy a home without actually seeing a person in it. or if in fact this is the beginning of a substantive change. There were some statistics. I think Redfin put a statistic out a year or so ago saying that some very large proportion of millennials had placed an offer on a home without actually having seen it themselves. We did one of our chart of the weeks on it, and a lot of people were scratching their heads trying to figure out if that's just crazy Californian millennials or just millennials in general or what. But I don't think we have enough information to say that we know that customers en masse have decided, you know what, I don't need to see the home anymore, or if it's just really just telling you that maybe there's something about this slice of customers that we've been watching over the last 2 months who is more highly motivated than normal to just buy a home no matter what.
Yeah, I think, this may be a piece where if you're comfortable with technology, it's easier to do. So for Gen Z, millennials, it's probably pretty easy. Gen X, probably easy. There may be some baby boomers that find it easy. But there's a phrase out there, you meet the customers where they are. And so if someone wants to come in and have, sit down with a salesperson, walk a model with them, so on and so forth, you kind of have to be able to do that model. But you also need to have the technology to, if somebody wants to buy it totally online, do the design selections online, do that too. And so you're going to be in this choppy water where you have to be able to do both. Rich, I'm interested on your side where you're leasing, same kind of thing happening?
Absolutely. The technological enhancements definitely were pulled forward. The 360 photography, the Rently and secure access into home, letting people see homes. It's an interesting fact. During this COVID time, our traffic was significantly less than the norm, but our take rate and our occupancy rates are increased. So as we look at this, what it does is it takes the tire kickers a little bit out of the market and allows you to focus on the serious buyers who are ready to go. And I think that's what we've learned from this piece.
Steve?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that because I think that's one of these things that people have really queried about the sustainability of this recovery and demand. This idea that perhaps we're seeing a pig in a python right now, where there's a whole lot of folks who had already done the preliminary work to get to a point of nearly willing to pull the trigger and buy a home before COVID hit. And then COVID hit, and then those people all got off the fence and said, okay, we'd already done the preliminary work and maybe starting to save up a down payment. That sounds like tire kicking to me. Like that sounds like people who would be kicking tires during that period. That's that if you're not seeing over the last 2 months, does that mean that we aren't sort of nurturing or seeing folks that are coming in at the top of the funnel, the very early stages, and need some time to develop into full-blown customers, and that we might therefore see a drop-off in demand because we have basically had very anemic developmental customer action, if you will, which would be indicative of tire kickers being out of the market. So I just wonder whether anybody thinks that the lack of tire kickers is actually something that needs to be dwelled upon as possibly a harbinger of some weaker demand in the future.
Mr. Chippero.
Yeah, I would say that, our traffic and activity right at the moment, of course, it's very regional, is not quite returned to pre-COVID levels, but, I would say our traffic and tire kickers probably about the same ratio with regards to what are converted into what we would call net signups.
There we go. I want to go back to this digitization thing and look at it with another prism. John, to you, Rich and Chuck have talked about, okay, dealing with customers, interactively. For John, for you, your customers are builders and so on. Are you using similar kind of digital tools to embed yourself more deeply into your customer, to understand what's going on, to be able to be more real time with what their world is, as opposed to waiting for a purchase order showing up? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. I'd say we, as a company, we definitely are focused on having content to engage in a technological way with our builder, you know, and that is the plan design, and we've invested over the years in more designers. We've hired more internal designers than we've hired traditional outside sales reps. The traditional outside sales rep will develop a relationship with the builder and hopefully, you know, earn his work through having a good price or good service or whatever that might be. Whereas if you have an opportunity to engage with a customer on something that's meaningful to them, which is their product, you know, their product that they want to build efficiently and reduce cost on, you actually have to find some value there and some content to talk about. Otherwise, you can just talk in circles. So I think one of the challenges, the biggest challenges we have to overcome is that collaboration between all of the players that touch any given trade, you know, not just framing, but plumbing and electrical, and the labor, the information management, and the people in the process. You know, can we collaborate more and do a better job of sharing and finding that true value and sharing it, not just having all that self-interest there.
Yeah. I mean, Margaret, I'm coming back to you. This was, you know, I first learned this word, I think it was actually from Jerry McCaughey, the FIOS, the
yes.
integrated offsite solution.
Offsite.
The idea that, you know, doing all that design, hard work up front interactively was what made the factory work as efficiently as it could.
Mm-hmm.
But it had, it was more than the panels and the floor decks.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually got out in the next stages in the house, the electrician, the plumber, the heat guy, everybody could work more efficiently because everything was the way it was supposed to be. Take that, Margaret.
Yes.
A little bit.
Well, I think that's what Chuck was referring to earlier with Pulte's acquisition of ICG at the beginning of the year, that they saw the opportunity to work with a group in Jacksonville that's very well established within the community there, offering a very similar process that is the fully integrated offsite solution. The fully integrated side of that means that you're building every house twice. The first time is in 3D. And that's where you really get to do the heavy lifting, but there's tremendous reward because you're rationalizing the plans, taking out the waste. It allows you to pre-cut for MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing coming in behind you. The level of precision is significantly higher. That means you can have a much tighter thermal envelope. These houses are going to be more energy efficient, which consumers are caring about. You're going to have less waste. You're not going to need a dumpster outside every house. And so it's not just whether or not it's wall panels and floor cassettes and roof trusses, but it's a whole kit. And the fully integrated part of it is that it's done in 3D so that you can install it very quickly, as Chuck referenced, with flying in the cranes flying in the trusses. So it all comes together very quickly. And I think that allows builders like Pulte to take control of the supply chain, which some of the builders seem to have been losing focus on over the last decade or so. They've been much more focused either on the consumer or on the land, but less so on getting the houses built out because they outsource so much of that. So the integration of it, Chuck and I have had this conversation before, but I feel like if you get that integrated part of it right, that's the brain of the operation, and then the factory itself is more of a commodity. So if you get that right in Jacksonville, you can go to framing companies or LBM dealers that have factories around the country and say, this is our blueprint, we're going to email it over to you, and we need you to produce these kits. And so controlling the brain is really going to be the value add.
Rich, I presume you're using some version of this in the work that you're doing, if you're doing it replicatable over time.
We are, George, and we're getting a lot of help from the manufacturing side. We didn't have that skill set organically on the design side. We did have it on the material selections and choices. So it was kind of a combination of what did we do well and what did the manufacturers bring to the table, and that combination is so far working out pretty well.
So what this leads to, and coming back to you, John, is this whole world that the manufacturer, supplier, distributor is probably going to be more complex. It'll have this combination of products and services. You know, we can help project manage the BIM process for you, builder, if you need it. We can, bring best solutions to things because we've done them before. So it's more than just a transaction around materials. It's a transaction around materials and services. Is that what it feels like?
It definitely feels that way. And it's almost like we would become a super supplier.
Yeah.
More products delivered more efficiently, using less people, to do it.
So at this point, I'm going to ask if you have questions, you in the audience, start putting them into the Q&A box or into the chat. And Dennis, if you can start doing them, we're going to have about 2 more minutes here of conversation. Then we'll start going into questions from the audience. So I want to come back here and ask a question. It's 10 years from now. What practice that we see regularly now is disappearing or almost gone?
I think on-site stick framing.
Okay, Steve?
I think I'd mentioned before, the thing that jumps right to mind is the payment of the co-broker commissions by the public home builders.
Yeah.
That'd be a good one.
Chuck?
Yeah, I agree with Margaret's comment. I see stick framing and a lot of the traditional processes that we do in the field today being more integrated, literally integrated in components, even to the point of there being some integration of certain trade activities driven by new technology that reduces the actual work effort that's required at the job site. So we see that as the future, and it's the only way to really drive the efficiency that's going to be necessary for attainability.
John?
I think the biggest one that I would see is probably on the broker side. There's companies like Homey who'll sell your house for a couple $1,000, and that's just, I don't believe the millennials will see the value in paying someone $40,000 to show them a house over a weekend. So I think that's a big change. And that probably goes in line with highly compensated salespeople that just take orders from people. It's kind of the same situation. If you get yourself in the right spot, you can make a lot of money for not doing a lot of work. So I think that'll change in order to affect affordability.
Rich?
But I think anything that is transactional and requires you to physically go deliver something, for primarily financial, is going to be done through the electronic medium, whether that be financial, whether it be docu-signing, whether it be selections. I mean, we're even to the point now, if we want to test materials, Amazon has 25 selections at our doorstep within 2 days. We don't have to go to a showroom anymore. All of those things that require brick and mortar, I think will largely at least be significantly impacted in 10 years.
Final question before we go to Dennis for what comes from the audience. If COVID has done anything, it is, I think, shone a light on the importance of health, healthiness, and safety. How do you think that plays itself out in our industry, Margaret?
Georgia, our mutual friend, Gene Myers in Denver at Tribe Homes really focuses on healthy homes and appeals to the consumer who's focused on clean air and clean building materials. Mm-hmm. So I think all of that is going to factor in the tighter thermal envelope, not recycling air with others, being sensitive to the cost, the energy bill cost, getting a HERS score rating lower is better. All of that's going to be more important. And if we can get away from the broker commissions at 3 to 4%, which is a huge number in dollars, absolute dollars, and then away from all the waste, we have a lot more money to invest in offering value to the consumer.
Yeah. Rich? Healthiness, safety?
Understanding that we're in our world, we deal with a 80% platform that's already there, and we're modifying it most of the time, with the exception of the modular piece. We are seeing places where the small bathrooms, the powder rooms, the cleaning stations are becoming more prevalent from a design side, with the design folks weighing in. And I think there'll be a whole new pathway that is not green on the recyclable piece, but green, as Margaret was saying, on the healthy side. Air measurements, water content sensors, all those things that we took for granted 4 or 5 months ago. You know, glove dispensers, things like that, they weren't even a second thought 3 months ago. Now they're standard practice built into the PPE on site.
Right. Steve Kim?
Yeah, I think in terms of home design, you could see some pretty significant changes. I think one of the major things from the exterior of the home that most new homes in 10 years, sort of answer your previous question more in the positive side, what things we see today. I think some sort of an integrated vestibule that would allow you to take delivery and also access it from the inside, maybe a refrigerated unit. I mean, a lot of the problem with the porch pirates and stuff like that can be resolved if you have something which is integrated into the design of the home from the get-go, so it's aesthetically pleasing from the outside, but highly functional on the inside. That does not strike me as something which can easily be retrofit, so it could also lead to a premium for new construction prices versus existing. I'm surprised we haven't actually heard builders talk more about that, because it seems like everybody gets everything on Amazon Prime these days. But so that's one thing on the outside of the home that I think could change. On the inside of the home, I think that from a health and wellness perspective, it would be surprising to me if you didn't see a little bit more of an emphasis on the home gyms, because gyms have been one of the areas that have been kind of there's been a heightened awareness of the of maybe the safety aspect of it. And so I think that you might see some more demand for home gyms inside the home that are designed that way.
Chuck?
Yeah, I echo a lot of the same comments. You know, indoor air quality, you know, and the management of indoor air in terms of comfort is really a priority. One of the reasons why our company, as well as 7 other major builders, have collaborated together to bring a new HVAC technology to the marketplace. A lot of it has to do with being able to provide a higher quality experience for the home buyer, including improving indoor air quality. Together with that same system comes an opportunity to improve the actual energy performance of the house by bringing everything into conditioned space. So builders are still quite a bit behind on moving really home design to bringing all the HVAC into conditioned space, but it's certainly a priority for our company, and definitely a trend that we'll see as you know, codes continue to become more stringent.
Yeah. John, you got the last word here.
I would agree with Chuck. I think air quality is a big one, and you know, from customers' standpoint, you know, we're not getting a lot of requests for, you know, hey, be more safe and be more healthy on their job, other than following the state's requirements. I would say there's an opportunity for us as a company to get them engaged in what Chuck just talked about, and providing products that can help design. And we go back to that design question. If we're handling and providing value on that design for the customer, Chuck being our customer, then we'll have the opportunity, because we own that information, to provide other products that might be healthier and lead, you know, let whatever Chuck wants us to provide him, we would provide.
Yeah. Dennis, can you come back up?
Sure can. All right.
So can you grab some of the ideas that are coming in here and thoughts, and kind of play the point guard and dish them to the team here?
Yeah, sure. We can do that. All right. So the first one we have out here is, how do you see framing contractors accepting this new panel process in light of their fear of losing work, since they seem to resist panels at every turn? Maybe we'll throw this one to you first, John.
It's a challenging situation, because you know, that labor group does not necessarily want their cheese moved, you know, and they're unsure what that's going to be. But that collaboration with those framing contractors is critical. I'm meeting with Frank Graham at Timberworks next Monday to go over this very issue, you know, because a builder wants a pre-cut system, and you know, Timberworks, who's a phenomenal framer, doesn't want to have to convert to someone else's system. So it's still going to be hard. Hopefully the lack of demand and ease of work from that framing community will urge them to try new things, you know, so we all got to win.
Rich, you've played this game for a long time. Any thoughts?
Internalization. That's how you jumpstart it. It's going to be, if you can't get the outside group to conform, then we'll bring it inside.
Yeah.
I think the problem is we motivate the framers to waste material because we pay them by the yard versus the job. So we could always change the incentive plan as well.
It's a powerful group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a question, that the question is, does the framer work for you or do you work for the framer? I think the answer has been the latter too often. Yet, I go back to Lee Evans, who I first learned a lot of the principles of this business from. And his thing was a manager's job is to compel events to conform to plan. And, this thing of you've got to make it happen. And if you can't make it using the external, I think Rich probably has the right thing. You jumpstart and you prove it internally. And this is where the industrial engineering piece comes in. You can prove out how long it takes and what would you be willing to pay so that the framer could make equivalent or more money. I mean, sooner or later, that's the way it probably has to happen.
Yeah, and I would echo that point, with our ICG acquisition, as we've developed new components to build faster, to do our, full house erection in 7 hours, we used our own internal framers to do that so that we could time study it, prove it, refine it. And then we were able to bring on our subs and show them how. But also a lot of it is change management with the subs to say, yes, we're taking away work from you on this given job site, but you need to show them a path to give them more work.
Right.
At the end of the week, they can take a look at their paycheck and they're making just as much money. Maybe they framed 2 or 3 additional houses. And so it's that change management that we've used to basically panelize about 70% of our company's production. And it's a long journey, but it's been one that we feel we've gotten a lot of value out of, and it comes to takes a lot of education, but to Rich's point, sometimes you got to do it yourself initially to jumpstart it.
Dennis, back to you. Another question.
Yeah, I think just an extension of that one from the community here is, in the future, will builders need to compete on excelling in one type of construction, or do you think they'll need to be able to span on-site panel modular? Maybe you can continue with that, Chuck.
I think a large builders in particular need to work on perfecting multiple techniques. Like on the Pulte side, we're not afraid, and we've used full modular in our past. Although we support the concept of using wall panels and floor cassettes, and we're working that side, there also is examples where we're using a BMC's ready frame, because those markets happen to have a little additional labor. There doesn't happen to be panel capacity, for example, in those locations. So I think you need to develop excellence and at least from a perspective, in at least those 3 different methodologies.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could address that question, George, I think that everything that we talk about in terms of offsite solutions, fully integrated solutions, ready frame, ICG, taking labor out of the process, it's all on a spectrum. If you go all the way to the end of that spectrum, you have modular product, which is fully contained, built, light fixtures, everything is installed in the factory and then it's shipped in like double wide. But you can have beautiful, high-end, high design, expensive modular product versus the less expensive mobile homes that are more common in this country. And my concern for all of us is that most industries that have seen tremendous disruption, like Amazon in retail, or Uber in the town car industry, or Airbnb with hotels, they have been completely disrupted by a model they did not see coming, which was direct B2C. And in particular, on the framing lumber side, we have 1-step, 2-step distribution, wholesale, retail distribution. There's just so many layers of cost and time and expense. If someone figures out how to rationalize that, and it sounds like Rich mentioned in Amherst, they may start doing communities of modular homes, that's going to be very powerful to displace and drive change and disrupt the industry, which we need.
Yeah.
Good. Anyone else like to add to that before we go on to the next one?
No, go.
Good. All right. All right. So do you see micro-draw technology, perhaps blockchain, playing a part in providing faster payments at the daily task and supply level? If so, what would this look like?
Wants to take that one on.
All right. So maybe we'll, no.
No,
Did we mention we're not tech industry?
no, but I can say that the importance of almost real-time payment for correct work would be a very important thing, no matter which technology you use. That the idea being that you have multiple strategic, arrows in your quiver to use. And one of them is speed of payment. And if you can get speed of performance and return for speed of payment, you have a strategic advantage vis-a-vis whoever your supplier or trade contractor is. And so there was a book written in 1980 called Competing Against Time. And time as a strategic weapon is powerful. If you could do a start from scratch home and deliver it in 30 days, in a world where most builders are taking months, if not years, to deliver homes, I would say that you have a strategic advantage. And if payment helps you get that way, all the better.
If I can add a little bit to that, just because the way you put it, I recall that book. I think that was Boston Consulting Group.
No, it's Stout and Hauk.
Stout and Hauk, yes.
Yeah.
So I think that works two ways on the speed of payment, and we're not even close, even though we consider ourselves pretty forward on technology. We're not into the blockchain payments. We're just still trying to master the basic EFT process. But it certainly the payment from the field triggered without all of the accounting friction sometimes that goes along with the construction piece is valuable. On the resident side, I hesitate, we use the term resident versus tenant. There is power in having that resident pay electronically versus the old, here's my money order, here's my paper check. I'm going to have a credit card piece. So that type of process has been expedited by COVID for sure.
Yeah. One more, Dennis.
Yeah, sure. All right. So as a follow-up question, talking about the trends that were happening after COVID, what pre-COVID trends do you think are no longer a priority? Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we'd seen for many years a downsizing trend, for lack of a better term. I think we saw that manifest in a lot of different ways. Urbanization, densification, trade down. So there was a lot of downsizing evidence of downsizing, I think, pre-COVID. And I think that with the shutdowns, that has abruptly been stopped in its tracks, and at least temporarily, but I don't actually believe temporarily. I think we have actually now entered a new era, and I think that we're actually going to go see more space, and space being valued more highly. And it's possible we could also see a deurbanization trend for a period of time as well. We'll see how that goes, but certainly it's kind of looking like that right now, for sure.
Steve, what do you think about model homes?
Whether they'll continue, well, I think that you need to have, I think you need to have the 3D technology implemented well enough before you would see builders get rid of the model homes. They may reduce them, though. They may reduce the number of model homes. But again, you would still need to have the 3D technology fully ramped up, I think, particularly at the higher end. You know, you need to where people need to see it and feel it to pay up. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. It just seems like it's always been a big use of capital that may not be necessary anymore if people are buying online and buying quickly.
I support what Stephen is saying, and that is, you know, when the BIM technology gets good enough and we can render and we can illustrate the actual options and finishes and textures that we're offering, it'll be much easier to bridge that gap and people to be much more comfortable buying virtually. Until that time, I think there's still going to be a blend, but the technology still has another couple of years before it's to a point where I think people will be comfortable buying without models.
But don't be surprised if that trend is going that direction.
Correct.
Dennis, I am always worried about time and so on, and my clock says it's 1 minute over.
Yeah, well, we actually work into this a 15-minute extension in the event that we have a few a strong attendance beyond our first hour, and we still have about 90% of the audience. So we're going to continue on for another 10 or so minutes just to get up to these final questions, if that's all right with everyone. If you need to drop off, we also respect that as well. Let's see. Do you think that there is a high market growth for do you think there's a high market growth upcoming for sustainable developers?
I'll take a first shot at that.
Please.
I think when sustainable means lower waste and healthier, it probably, the answer is yes. Healthier usually comes with fairly good, at least internal energy utilization. So I think that works. So I think the answer is, with those qualifiers, yes. The sustainable always has to play itself out in the real world against cost and what things sell for or rent for. And that's going to be the battle of values that will continue to play itself out. But I think if anything, what the last several months have shown is that if you are more sustainable, you can have elements that are more cost efficient and more healthy. So I think builders who figure out how to demonstrate that commitment and the way they're doing things probably will have a segmentational advantage for a segment of the market.
Okay. Very good. Stephen, anything you'd like to add there?
I haven't seen a tremendous amount of appetite for sustainable for the public builders. I mean, Meritage does some things. The builders, I think, use it as a marketing tool, but I haven't seen it as something which is meaningful yet. Doesn't mean it won't be, but I think it's going to be segmented. I think there's going to be a market segment that's going to value it clearly, and as that demonstrates itself in terms of willingness to pay extra for things, I think the builders will be happy to incorporate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Any other additional thoughts? Oh, we're good there. All right. Let's see. What is the biggest challenge for the large tract builders to transition to integrated offsite construction?
I'll take the first shot at it. The will of the CEO.
Leadership buy-in.
If you think it's important, it will happen. If you don't, it won't, or it'll fumble.
I agree with that. In fact, when we were representing ICG earlier this year on their sale, the fact that Ryan Marshall, the CEO of Pulte, was so invested and interested and engaged in the process really made a difference to Ryan and his team.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, let's in the world where Margaret lives and Stephen does, that this whole thing of innovation, and whether it's innovation in the way you sell, the way you build, the business model you choose, and so on, it is some of the hardest change that you can imagine for an existing company. And therefore, if there is not a mandate from the board level to do it, and will from the executive, the chief executive, to have it happen, it will fit and start. It's why one of the bigger concerns is somebody starting from scratch without those impediments may actually have a lead time, even though the bigger builders may have the capital and so on. So my charge,
relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
John and I actually had this conversation, George. We were both in Dallas earlier this year speaking at the Pro Sales Conference, and I was talking about the opportunity for innovation and the keys to success, one of which is that you have to change your thinking to this is an expense to this is an investment. We're investing in the innovation. And if you think about it that way and you realize you need buy-in from senior leadership, the board, through the executive team, you also need time and you need to be flexible. You need to come up with an idea, put it to work. If it's not working, pivot. Just learn from what has or has not worked and just keep pivoting until you get it right. There's no shame in that. Fail fast.
Mm-hmm.
So Margaret, how many, or Stephen, how many of the major public builders have a senior executive in charge of research and development?
There's very few. Very few. Meritage had one. I suppose, I mean, for sure Pulte. But outside of that, they're not folks that break through very often. Lennar obviously has some focus on it. But not necessarily in the same way, I don't think, as Pulte does in terms of the construction side. So it's slow.
So,
but the flip side of that, Stephen, is that Fifth Wall, which is one of the venture capital funds in Silicon Valley, I think they're on their second fund this year, that is focused on improving residential construction. Mm-hmm. The first fund wasn't a Toll and Lennar invested in it, and then the next fund was Toll, Lennar, and Pulte and a couple of their peers. And what that demonstrated to me was that they understood that they weren't innovative, they didn't have the DNA, but they were willing to put some capital at risk to see what the opportunities might be.
So do you think there's going to be opportunities out there for more of this at different levels where the R&D effectively is outsourced, or the commercialization is outsourced into a series of venture funds or whatever you'd call them, that potentially bring these ideas to scale and then integrate them back into builders or manufacturers or subcontractors or wherever the innovation lies? Is that an opportunity that's out there?
It's an opportunity. I guess I would express what I mentioned earlier, is that Pulte and 7 other builders have invested in a startup company called RIA, which is aimed towards establishing a new way to distribute HVAC. It's a different supply duct system for improved performance that meets a lot of the objectives we're talking about. It gives us an opportunity to build more attainable homes and build more.
So the question is, could we have 500 RIAs running in parallel?
We could. There is some efforts underway where people are looking to build a similar consortium in order to do some development in other areas, but it's not a structured activity at this point.
Most of the venture capital that's coming in is divided between 3 buckets. One is the construction technology, like ICG with Pulte. The second is the software like Procore that's facilitating communication. And then the third is AI, anything artificial intelligence related. But a venture capital fund, George, is like a home builder. They've got a bucket of capital and they have to decide which type of product, which business they invest in. And as those businesses prove out their concept and grow and commercialize, then maybe they'll be acquired by the builder that had invested in the fund.
Yeah. So just interesting area. But I think the idea coming back, builders are used to every day allocating resources to the next piece of land, the next community. But the concept of allocating some toward innovation is doesn't sit in the same kind of structure, and maybe it should. So, Dennis, back to you.
Yep. One last question before we wrap up for today. So I think this is a good one to conclude on. So this panel's forward thinking, and it was all about inspiration for the industry going forward. You know, if we were going to write our story, where do we want to be? Could you describe your vision for what a market leading company would look like across sales, construction, and service in 5 years?
Ooh. Ooh.
I have one. I think, and John, we talked about this before. It's the Tesla of housing. It's good, better, best, beautifully designed, energy efficient product. It's built in a factory, sold and shipped direct to the consumer, you know, via Amazon or online. That's my vision.
In 5 years?
I
Are
got
we going
something
to
to work
start this
towards.
business together, John?
Possible.
Why not?
We need to get out for beers more often.
I
I
know.
mean, we went into and won and got out of World War II in less than 5 years.
I agree.
Look at Amazon.
Yeah, I agree with Margaret. I think there is an opportunity for companies to innovate and have that unique offering that maybe appeals to that unique audience that might want sustainability or energy efficiency or whatever that is. But it goes back to the last question, what is it going to take to change? Someone said it's got to have a CEO that buys in. The building homes in America is a local business, and it's done with local leaders, and those local leaders have to see the benefit in it. And if their interest is not met, then the change is slowed down. So there has to be compelling reason to change at a local level. And I think that's going to be the thing that makes the biggest difference for us as an industry.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of resistance because of generations, kind of old school looking in the rearview mirror versus looking forward, John. But if you did have a Tesla type model in housing, all these locals could be completely disrupted.
Agreed.
And it's happened in so many other industries. That's the risk for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis, I think
Think we've
we're
worked
there.
through them. All right. Well, really appreciate everyone's time today. We've received a wonderful set of comments and a lot of signs of appreciation for the time you've dedicated to our community. Thanks for letting us pick your brain, sharing your ideas. We've actually received a few requests to bring the same panel back again in the near future, so we might be reaching out to everybody to make that happen. Likely can weave that into one of our happy hour conversations so that we can bring everybody back and a few other of the panelists from different events. But just to conclude today's session, want to again say thanks to everybody that was here today. Thanks, George, for facilitating. Thank you to all of our community members that participated. We had just over 120 people that were joining us throughout the course of the hour. We have another coffee talk coming up on June 23rd. We're going to talk about consumer and housing provider attitudes as it relates to home performance and technology. We're going to be bringing in Matt Daigle from Build with Rise, a Canadian company that works with consumers to better understand building performance products and technologies. And then we also have Jenny Lance from John Burns Real Estate Consulting, and she's a senior manager of Design Lens, so she'll be bringing a unique perspective. You can look to see maybe 2 or 3 other players added to that panel session as well in the next couple of days. We're just locking that in. In addition, we have our BIM Roadmap will finally be going live on June 24th. So Betsy will be launching that with several of our collaborators on Dave Cooper Live through LinkedIn. And then following that, we will have our happy hour. So the happy hour is an opportunity to bring together the panelists from 3 of our previous coffee talks and break them into think tank discussions where we can kind of have an opportunity for them to network with our community members and pick their brains a little bit about some of the ideas that were discussed in these types of conversations that we hosted here. And if there's anything you'd like to follow up on and get to know some of our individual community members, we have our podcast series, which was launched in partnership with the University of Denver. We have several podcasts available on some of the industry leaders and disruptors, as well as many of which are members of our community that are kind of moving and shaking and leading transformation. So you can check that out on our website, and we launch one of those once a week. And with that, I want to say thanks again to everybody. Appreciate all the support and participation from the community and the Housing Innovation Alliance team, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Take care, everyone.